Today's video will detail the noun identification process. Hello, I'm James Helfrich. Most of the time, when we work with real-world problems, we start with a poorly defined requirements. The customer says, hey, I need you to support technology X, or I need to implement feature Y. From these vague requirements, it's very difficult to identify program entities. So how do we go about this process? This video will detail the noun identification process, which helps us to identify program entities from, at first, vague and general requirements and down to very specific requirements. So noun identification is the process of carefully combing through client-provided requirements to discover program entities. And there's several things we look for. First of all, common nouns are classes usually. Proper nouns are objects or instances of classes. Adjectives are member variables or attributes of a class. An action verb is a function or method depending upon whether that action verb is closely associated with a noun or whether it stands on its own. And a having verb is a class in a class. In other words, we could have aggregation or composition. And a being verb is inheritance. So let's take a look at this process. We'll start and we're going to generate a collection of use cases. These use cases are always described from the client's or the user's perspective. And usually these are very general. In fact, most use cases begin as epics. These are 2 or 3 weeks worth of work that is very generally described and encapsulates a great deal of functionality. Now, it's easy to start with these use cases, but they are not quite specific enough to do the noun identification process. So from here, then we're going to pick a single use case from the collection of use cases we have, and usually we start with the most specific one. And then we're going to say, hey, are we done? Have we got through all our use cases yet? Probably not, so let's continue on. Now we're going to generate requirements from this use case. We're going to take this use case that's described from the client or the user's perspective, and now we're going to describe it from the software's perspective. We're going to be very specific about what needs to happen. And once again, we're going to start kind of general and then work our way with more and more and more specific requirements. Now, of course, we don't need to record these requirements. We don't need to give them back to the user or anything. This is just one step in the noun identification process. Now that we have the requirements generated, then we're going to pick one requirement, and we're going to take a look at this guy carefully. And we're going to say, hey, is that the last requirement? No. Then from this, we're going to identify the entities by looking at the noun identification process. We're going to look for proper nouns and adjectives and action verbs and things like that. Now, it's critical at this point in time that we look for the hidden nouns. We look for the hidden verbs, the ones that are implied but not directly stated. Whenever we discover one of these, we're going to rewrite the requirement more specifically and more precisely, and then start that step 5 again. Now, when we're finished with this, then we're going to identify our collaborators. Hey, this verb requires a noun as a parameter, but what is that noun? And let's see if we can dig into that one in more detail by firming up those requirements. Now, when we're done, we're going to go back and pick another requirement or another requirement, another requirement, and we're going to continue on this process here. And then if there is no more requirements left, then we're going to go back up and generate use cases. Now you're going to ask yourself, why do I bother do this? Because I already generated my use cases. And the answer is this. When we generate our use cases from step 1, the initial time, we had a limited understanding of the project. In other words, the process of generating code is not just about writing code, but it's about learning about the project. And as we dig deeper and deeper into the project, we learn more and more. Now, after we've gone through the process of working through several requirements, we're going to learn more about the project we did initially. And so we're going to go back and ask better questions of the client and of the stakeholder and the product owner. And then he's going to give us a new set of use cases. And from those use cases, we're going to continue the process anew. Only after every single aspect of the product that the product owner or the client or the user has told us about and has been actually turned into entities in the program are we finished. And at that point in time, then the project is done and we're ready to start writing code. You can learn more about this in the noun identification process of the noun identification chapter of the software design textbook.